Hello, everyone. My name is Susan Kudalakis, and I'm Senior Marketing Manager here at Progress. Welcome to our Why ISVs Embed Data Connectivity webinar. So let's start by quickly introducing you to today's speakers. I am joined by Todd Wright and Dennis Bennett. Todd leads Global Product Marketing for Progress Data Direct Solutions. He works closely with the product management and sales organizations to create and promote materials that are relevant and valuable to Progress customers. He is instrumental in developing customer relationships and creating strategic marketing plans that drive awareness, consideration, education, and demand for Progress. Dennis Bennett has over 20 years of experience in working with companies to help solve their data connectivity challenges. In the past, he's worked as an application developer, DBA, and QA engineer. At Progress, he is principal sales engineer for the data connectivity and integration products. I'm really excited to have both Todd and Dennis with us today, so now I'll turn it over to them to start the discussion.
All right, thanks, Susan, and hello, everyone. This is Todd Wright, as mentioned. And on the webcast today, we're going to mix it up a little bit from what we normally do. And we're going to have more of a conversational type of format. To help me with this endeavor, welcome again to Dennis Bennett. As Susan mentioned, Dennis has decades of field experience working with leading companies, include, I believe, close to 2 decades with Progress. So it's really safe to say Dennis has a wealth of information he's able to share today. And I'm really going to pick his brain on all things data direct, and in particular, our work with independent software vendors that embed our data connectivity. So welcome again, Dennis. And if you're ready, let's jump right into it.
Sounds good.
All right. When looking, Dennis, when looking at the Data Direct webpage, it really is a who's who of leading analytics and business intelligence providers, and really as well other software vendors that are leaders in their respective space. And I was wondering, Dennis, can you give us a little insight into some of the use cases and how Data Direct has helped these independent software vendors in some of their initiatives with data connectivity?
Yeah, like you said, it is quite a list of some very serious companies that we get to work with. Very proud of the relationship we have with those guys. And as you mentioned, a lot of them are business intelligence tools. Others are data integration products, data governance, extract, transformation, and load (ETL) tools. Basically, any tool that needs data. We can add value to that. Typically, for a vendor product, a software vendor product that deals with data, the more connectivity options they can offer their users and prospects, the more value they're going to bring to the table. And that's our goal, is to help their initiatives and their products, be more valuable, be more sticky, get more traction in the marketplace. These vendors, they want to be able to say yes when a prospect comes to them with some data connectivity requirements. And so that's where we kind of come into it. We've been doing this for a long time. We have relationships with software vendors that go back, decades, actually. Initially, we were in the space around relational databases, and we did things like we stuck really closely to the standards. Initially ODBC, later JDBC, ADO.NET, today REST sources. But we find we bring value in that way by sticking to the standards, and just make it easier for a software vendor to support multiple different data sources as much as possible with a single code path. And we have a lot of things we've done over the years to make that possible. So, as I said, it was relational to begin with, but more recently, and I say recently, it's 10 years now, but we've added some of the big data sources, and things like Hive, things like Spark, Impala. Some of these were similar to relational databases, and some of them are very, very different. And things like Hive is a lot like a relational database, but something like a MongoDB really couldn't be more different than a relational database, in that there's no schema. rather than relational data. It's documents, and often very complex documents. And even after that, with REST APIs that SaaS applications, software as a service applications use, introduces similar complexity to Mongo. So, but
Yeah,
the
yeah.
goal, sorry, is the goal is to make these things look and behave in a standardized fashion, similar to a relational database, just to make life easier for the vendors out there.
That's interesting. In the 2 years that I've been with Progress Data Direct, to your point, one thing that I've noticed the most is the amount of new data sources that we have introduced that aren't really relational databases. Really going for the unstructured and social media, and I think it's really valuable to your points to be able to have a lot of different data sources that they can feed into their BI and analytics programs. So yeah, it's great. And you
Yeah,
had
to that,
also, yeah, yeah,
sorry,
go ahead. Sorry.
to that point, initially in the early days of relational databases, there was a number of different ones out there, and there was winners and losers, and it really settled down to, 3 to 5 kind of big players, and it stayed like that for a while. But like, as you say, today, that is not the case. We see new sources springing up all the time, and they're very different, and they're very different from relational. So yeah, it's a brave new world out there, and it's very different than how things used to be.
Yep, yep, absolutely. And you had mentioned one thing that piqued my interest. You had mentioned the word options. And we all know that there's a lot of options out in the market. And one question we get at Data Direct fairly often from independent software vendors is, what about the option of just having our users buy their data connectivity separately, as opposed to us embedding it in our platform? What are your thoughts really regarding that question? And what benefits have our ISV partners realized by going the embedded route as opposed to, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Customer, just go out and find your own connectivity?
Yeah. Ultimately, it just comes down to the user experience, which is going to be easier, less friction for the users, everything in the box, or do they need to go out after they, purchase the software vendor's product? Do they need to go out and, do some other things? And really, we kind of liken it to, batteries included. If you think about, if you have young kids and you buy toys that require batteries, and if you forget the batteries on Christmas morning, the experience is not a good one, right? So
Lots of
it's
tears,
the
yeah.
same sort of thing, right? We try to make it where it's just easier. And another, we talked about some trends before. One trend is um, software vendors are targeting less technical audiences, not really going for the IT department anymore. They go for, power users who know their data, but maybe they don't know databases. They don't know, some of the tooling around it. These people, you make it difficult for them. You want to enable them to do the work. They know the data, but they may not know, how to go out there and find the right database driver for their needs. And it's really just frustrating. So it's just trying to make it easier, a better experience, less friction. And the other thing is I talked about after the sale, but as far as proof of concepts go, you want to make that easy. You don't want to, we definitely see users, if they download a product and it doesn't work easily, there's a lot of other choices out there. They'll just kind of move it aside and try the next one, and hopefully have a better experience. So anything we can do to make that better for our software vendor partners, to make the POC go well, and less kind of fallout on that, is to everyone's benefit.
Yep, absolutely agree. And so you had a nice segue again. You had talked a little bit about our software. Let's go a little bit deeper into the actual software from Data Direct. And really, for our audience, what are some of the connectivity options available to independent software vendors from Data Direct? I know from a marketing perspective, and of course, I work at Data Direct, I see things like our full catalog, something called hybrid data pipeline, autonomous REST connector, open access. For the benefit of our audience, can you go a little bit into what those entail and what are some of the areas that our partners, our ISV partners, are really seeking out from Data Direct at this point?
Yeah, so you asked, what's out there, in our catalog of connectors and products, and what leads, us to pick one versus the other. It really is a question of understanding the use case, what the software vendor wants to enable for their prospects and customers, and based on that, it's often pretty clear what the best path is. Sometimes there's a couple different ways, and it's a little more nuanced, and we kind of try to understand it better. But to begin with, hybrid data pipeline, I might call it HDP for short.
Mm-hmm.
That one is actually more than a driver. A lot of the other ones are, straight connectivity. HDP is more of a data hub or a gateway with embedded connectivity to 40 or more data sources. And that connectivity is actually extensible. So, if what we have in the box for, the relational databases, the big data, the software as a service applications, if you don't see what is necessary, is needed there, we can actually use other drivers to do it. So it's very flexible that way. HDP, it supports out of the box multiple tenancies, multiple tenants. It's very, very granular user roles can be set up, things like that. It has strong auditing capabilities. So what we see for software vendors in this case, one major use case is someone with a software as a service application that they have data behind it, maybe a data warehouse that they want to give to their customers for reporting. Basically, customers want to run their own BI tools against their own data, even though it's in the cloud, behind the SaaS application. With hybrid data pipeline, it's very easy to securely share your data and do it in a multi-tenant fashion, and give people access to it. And that access is either ODBC, JDBC, or OData, which is a REST kind of variant. So with those three protocols, basically any BI tool is available to be used at that. So that's a major use case we see. Another one, and again, this is usually a software as a service vendor in the cloud, but sometimes customers have data that they want, in the cloud, but sometimes certain data is, they want to keep it on-prem. They don't want to upload it. So, but they still maybe want to be able to use it in the application, maybe report on it. Hybrid Data Pipeline has a feature called the on-premises connector, which enables SaaS vendors to be able to, with HDP, with Hybrid Data Pipeline and the on-premises connector, be able to access customers' data that is behind a firewall without having to open up a VPN or anything like that. So that's a pretty common use case. Those are some of the major ones we see for Hybrid Data Pipeline. Another thing we see with the kind of onslaught of new data sources, one thing most of them have in common, pretty much close to all of them, is that they expose data through a REST API. And so, a number of years now, probably 4 coming up on 5 years, we thought that if we could build a universal REST driver, ODBC or JDBC SQL access to REST, that was going to fit the bill for a lot of software vendor partners who needed access to these sources, and didn't want to, build a custom REST connector for each. Certainly, people can do that. That's what it's made for, but everything, it's a one-off custom process. So the idea of Arc, the autonomous REST connector, is it's not an SDK. It's really just a low touch process using our composer to set up the driver to be able to access different REST sources. And what that gives is software vendors, it just greatly expands the data access options that they have. We've built a bunch of REST models for Arc already. We have over 50 of those pre-built. And those are certainly, if you use the autonomous REST connector, they're all available to you. And then if you have something that's maybe more proprietary or more niche, you can use the autonomous REST connector with the composer to configure your own. if we already have a commercial driver built for the API, the source you want, say Microsoft Dynamics 365 or SAP S4HANA, you're going to be well served just taking the driver that we already have. And really the last one I would highlight is the Open Access SDK Software Developer Kit. That would be in the case, maybe it's a completely proprietary API and it's not REST, and you could use open access for that. An interesting kind of trend we're seeing lately, probably over the last 3 years, is we're seeing a lot of data security use cases that leverage the open access SDK. What they do in that case is they take an existing, often JDBC driver, for a database, let's say Oracle or SQL Server, and they want to add some kind of role-based access control or maybe data masking. In this way, when a user logs in using the Open Access SDK and the existing driver that's already there, you're able to see who the user is, see what kind of data entitlements that they should have access to, and then from there go ahead and do things like row level security to limit the data they can see, or data masking of sensitive data. So that's one we're seeing a lot of lately. But to your original question, really there's a bunch of different tools that we have, and it really, typically, depending on the use case, it's pretty clear which one is the one that's going to be the right fit.
That makes sense. So at the end, you had mentioned security, and I think everyone, you and I know, and everyone on this call knows that privacy and security is becoming more of an important topic by the day. We have the GDPR out of Europe, HIPAA, of course, California data laws. When you're asked by customers, independent software vendors, or just companies in direct about the data privacy laws that are out there and how data connectivity from data direct fits into all that, what are some of the things that you say to them to really set their mind at ease that more data, more access, obviously, to data is important, but it does open it up to security and privacy concerns. What if you could expand a little bit on that, and how we at Data Direct really put our customers' minds and prospect minds at ease when it comes to that?
Yeah, so at Data Direct, we have a strong focus on security, and that goes back decades. Again, obviously, just giving data access and leaving vulnerabilities out there does nobody any favors. So one thing we do is with the drivers, we actually provide a statement of quality, which reports on some of the internal scanning that we do of our source code. We use other services to discover any kind of vulnerabilities. We do use some third-party products within our drivers, and we are always checking to make sure that there are not any kind of vulnerabilities in this. In that statement of quality, we'll also call out all the third-party products that could be included in the driver, and what level of release level they're at. We do antivirus scanning to make sure that once it's packaged, nothing like that is introduced. And then another concern for software vendors is that we don't have any kind of software in there that breaks some kind of license restriction, like a GPL or an AGPL or something like that. We don't want to, because if we did that, the customer, the software vendors themselves would at that point be concerned that they would also be out of compliance. So again, there's a lot of focus on security. We have some service level objectives on our website that talk about the different levels of vulnerability and how quickly we're going to get them remediated. We have on the website some information on our SOC 2 certifications. We have some ISO ones. All of these things are really designed to make the customer, our software vendors, comfortable that we are a good partner to work with on this.
Yeah, a lot of transparency. That's one thing that I've been happy in my time here at Data Direct. We're really transparent about what we try to do with security. Now that we've dived a little bit into the software, it really begs one to ask, at least I have the question, why Data Direct? I think we all know every industry and every company that sells anything, customers have options. And with that said, why have so many independent software vendors, ISVs, partner with Data Direct?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Really, our business is data connectivity, and the the partnerships with other software vendors is a major portion of the Data Direct business. We sell directly to end users, companies, but most of what we do is through other software vendors where they embed our technology. So we strive to be excellent partners to these people, and we do a good job of it. We've been doing it for a long time. We've learned what works, with people, and we're able to partner, all the way from the smallest startups to the largest companies, like the IBMs and Oracles.
Mm-hmm.
And so the flexibility to be able to have a good partnership with, the gamut, the full, range of software vendor sizes. Another thing to look at is some of our partnerships actually do go back decades. So obviously, if they weren't happy, they would have been long gone. And even some of these, if you look at some of them, these companies are smaller or sometimes, actually small. And today, they've grown to the point where, everyone knows them. So it's been a good partnership, where we provide our, core competency, which is connectivity, and allows the database vendor, or not database vendor, the software providers themselves to stick to theirs. They, basically do what makes their product great and understand that we will give them connectivity to, all the sources they need. Another thing which we haven't talked about yet, but is a differentiator, is this kind of support our partners get from Progress Data Direct. I've worked with our support team, and I've been very impressed with the work they do, and even things like I've seen them continue to work a problem even after it's been clear that the problem is not with the driver, it's with some other factor. They don't basically just wash their hands and say, up, point the finger somewhere else. So, and that's just another part of being a good partner. Maybe the last thing I would bring up on that is, as a partner, we want to hear what the software vendors our partners want, as far as the roadmap. What is something that's important to them? What would, help them, do better? Because ultimately, anything that improves the, the traction that our partners get is all good for us. So, we want to work together on things like, the direction where we are going with our connectivity applications.
Yep, meet their needs. Well, Dennis, thanks for all of that. And one final question before I open up the lines for audience questions. All the questions have not ended yet. Take us through a little bit of the process of becoming a partner of Data Direct's. If you're an independent software vendor out there, what can one expect? Is there a proof of concept that is a normal process, consulting services that they need to go through? And what are some of the time frames, if you can recall, if there is an average time frame, a partner should be able to get up and going with Data Direct and embedded connectivity within their software stack?
Yeah, so like you said, we would expect there to be some kind of technical proof of concept. Obviously, people want to do due diligence and make sure it's going to fit their needs. They wouldn't, test absolutely everything they need, but they would pick, some major features that are important just to verify and validate that it does perform, and have the functionality that they need. Through that process, we have a dedicated pre-sales team to provide free technical support. no kind of, you wouldn't have to pay for consulting services on that. As far as the length of time, that's going to vary. Some of the products, we listed before will have a longer sales cycles than others. There may be more complexity to the setup, and what needs to be tested and validated. For example, the open access SDK, since there's actually code being written, that would be a little bit longer. Of a proof of concept and so forth. Hybrid data pipeline, it's not really coding, but there's more setup. Since it's more of a server, you would probably set up, for a production like test, a couple of servers behind a load balancer. You test some connectivity to different data sources. So, there's multiple pieces to that. One thing is interesting is the autonomous REST connector. That one actually can be surprisingly quick, where you just kind of point it at a REST API and in a very short time, and I mean by like an hour or less sometimes, depending on the number of REST endpoints that you want to map, you can actually be pulling back data via SQL. So that one is actually kind of cool to see. And the same thing for the commercial off-the-shelf drivers that we have, for like SQL Server or Dynamics 365 or some of the SAP ones. That one really is just setting up an environment and doing some testing and perhaps performance testing depending. So again, that could be a fairly quick one. And a lot of times that's driven by, the software vendor's needs. I've definitely been involved with some, even earlier this year, where they had a pressing need to get something out the door. And they were hitting some issues with someone else's driver. And, we worked quickly to get them going and, even, did some things that were, a little more difficult to make sure that they could fully test everything and be comfortable in a very short time frame. While the technical testing is going on in parallel, there'll be commercial, discussions around the contract itself. We've been partnering with software vendors for many years, and we're actually very flexible on how we can work together. We'll have discussions to understand, how the software vendor wants to go to market, and we'll align ourselves to that. If they count, users, if they count servers or things like that, we will align our contract to go with that. We're not going to have them counting new metrics that they're not currently monitoring. We kind of joke, the tail doesn't wag the dog. Basically, we're going to align with how our partners go to market on that. And so again, a lot of flexibility, and a lot of times these things start small. We kind of have some starter packs for people, and they'll grow as the company and as the product grows. And a lot of them will have enterprise license agreements, but that's over time. That's not immediately. Usually it's more fenced, just so there's not, so people are comfortable, that it's going to align with, how they're going to go, especially with a new product. It's difficult to know, how much, traction they'll get in the market.
Sure,
but,
sure.
It's flexible, and, that's not a difficult thing. And then after that, assuming that we come to an agreement, there's an onboarding process to introduce the new partner to Progress, showing them how to get a Progress ID, how to work with support, how to get access to our partner link portal, how to sign up for our customer validation program. That's, I hadn't mentioned that before, but that's something for customers where they can get early access to software kind of preview. And also sometimes we'll do sessions where we'll cover, some new functionality coming, things like that. So that's definitely something I recommend people, new customers get involved with, and even things like signing up for Progress Alert notifications. So
Sure.
beyond that, we'll often assign a customer success manager to make sure the new partner, gets off to a successful quick start, doesn't waste time. And ultimately, the goal is to establish, a long-term, mutually beneficial partnership that allows us both to be successful.
Dennis, that was great and very thorough. I think our audience members would agree that it had some really great answers to some of the questions that I posed. At this point, we have several questions from our audience in the queue.
All right, Todd and Dennis, thank you so very much. There was so much information that you guys provided. Let's jump in and start with a question. And just a reminder for folks on the line, if you have any questions, you can just put them in the chat or you can use the questions panel. What is the best way to get started if you're thinking about using a data direct product?
Yeah, this is Dennis. I can take that.
Sure.
Really, I mean, think about your use case. As I said before, often it's clear, which progress product would be, which data direct product would be, the fit for you. Sometimes there's questions. We certainly would recommend, contacting us, and we could set up a call to kind of talk about the use case. Probably demo the product that seems appropriate, and just make sure that we understand, what you're looking to do, and that we can help you to kind of think about like a proof of concept just to make sure, everything is good and that you understand the product and you're comfortable with it. But really that I would say is, understand the use case. You can look at our website and see it, a little bit about what fits. Often it's clear. Sometimes it's kind of a little bit gray. You have to kind of talk it through, but really, doing a call with us and going from there, I think, and we can definitely help you get started, and, as we understand what you're looking to do.
And I would also say, Dennis, if you want to get an initial feel for what Data Direct is all about before even talking to us, please go onto our website and try a trial and see what we can do for you and see how we can be a fit for your organization.
Cool.
All right, the next question. Is there a published roadmap?
So that is, product managers kind of responsibility. And we definitely have roadmaps, and often, especially with software vendors, often they are interested in, what's coming, and also letting us know what is of interest to them. We often will set up calls with the PM team, the product managers, and kind of go over with some of our software vendor partners to kind of go over, what is our plan. We are an agile development shop, and we, have 4 PIs throughout the year, and we'll do planning at the beginning of each. So, we definitely know what is for the next PI, and often for, a couple beyond that, some of the things we're looking to get to. But again, we definitely like to hear from software vendor partners what they're looking for and what we could do that would, provide value to them. So.
Yeah, and I would also add, in the product marketing role, I'm in charge of the website, and the roadmap isn't something that we really blast all over the website or publish all over the website. But if you are an organization that is interested in embedding Data Direct within your solution, absolutely, we have a product management team that will go over the roadmap with you.
Okay, I think we have time for one more. What are some other ways software vendors have used Data Direct that you might not have touched upon during the discussion?
We've seen people, software vendors who, this is going back a couple years sometimes, but they've had an on-prem solution and they wanted to migrate it to the cloud, and they had things where the users were dependent on being able to report on the data behind the application. They were, when it was on-prem, it was their database, and they could report on it to their heart's content. But now that it's in the cloud, it's a shared database. And plus, you can't just put a database out there and open it up to the internet without asking for big trouble. And we've seen people, several software vendor partners use hybrid data pipeline for that kind of migration or modernization of their application. The other thing is, since, again, something behind hybrid data pipeline, the database that they're using to allow their end users to report on, sometimes they'll switch those for different reasons, technical, financial, whatever. But because it's behind hybrid data pipeline, they were able to do so without impacting the end users. That was, a benefit of it. It was not the intended, use case when they started, but it was a nice, the flexibility was a nice thing to have, and it really, went a ways to helping customer satisfaction for the software vendor. And it turned out there was actually a couple things we needed to do. There was some things where the database case sensitivity had changed from one database to the other. And we were able to help them through hybrid data pipeline, make it completely seamless. So that's definitely one I can think of. I've seen people do stuff like, again, similar, I've seen people before use open access to do a database migration and do it in a way that was completely, transparent to the users. And I guess one thing we didn't mention is, and this applies mostly to like ODBC drivers, but we do support a broad selection of platforms, often more than other connectivity vendors do. And, that can be helpful for people if they're, running on a platform that, may, is not Linux or, not Windows or something like that. We can often help them with that. I don't know, Todd, if you have anything beyond that.
I think you pretty much covered it all within my questions and that question. So yeah, great.
Cool.
All right. Well, I don't see any more questions. So we'll wrap up our session today. So thank you from all of us at the Data Direct team, and enjoy the rest of your day. And we have a little video that we're going to play as we head out for the rest of the day today. So thank you all.
Thanks, Susan.
Thank you.
For organizations across diverse industries, the lack of data connectivity is one of the biggest barriers to a successful business intelligence and analytics program. Leading BI and analytics software providers looking to solve this issue for their customers have turned to Progress Data Direct. By embedding Data Direct connectivity into their software, these providers can now offer access to a wide range of data sources that can reside either in the cloud or on-premise, all from within a single platform and without ever compromising on data privacy or security. Learn why Data Direct is the provider of choice for over 350 independent software vendors and what we can do for you.